I'm Sarah Hartland. I'm the Director of Demand Generation at Endor Labs. Yeah, it's interesting. Even a year ago, a lot of demand generation professionals were still talking about marketing qualified leads and sort of the MQL demand waterfall that we've all gotten so used to. I remember talking to demand gen managers, a year, 2 years ago, and the discussion was still very much focused on how do we use MQLs but do it better? How do we convince our leadership that we should ungate content? Fast forward to 2023 and heading into 2024, the debate seems to be settled. More and more demand generation professionals are convinced that ungating content and moving away from those strategies is the way to go, which to me is a good sign. They have not been effective for a long time. And so instead of throwing an ebook online and getting as many email addresses as possible, now we have to focus on much more fundamental things, which I think is really exciting. Building strong brands, educating buyers, and making sure that the content they want to consume is readily accessible for them, which are all, I think the right strategies. And now there seems to be a much more broad consensus amongst the demand generation field that is the way to go. So I think for 2024, that's the predominant trend, is instead of debating whether or not we should take this approach, now we're taking this approach and we're jumping in with both feet. So most recently at Jupiter One, I spent almost a full year transitioning that team from a traditional lead generation approach to, the demand generation approach that I think the market demands right now. And what that looks like is moving away from a contact-based funnel where you have, email addresses at the top, slightly warmer leads, marketing qualified leads, sales accepted leads, the traditional funnel. It's great to say that doesn't work, but you got to replace it with something. So in the case of Jupiter One, we replaced it with two core leading indicators. The first one is inbound demo requests. And some, businesses would equate these with marketing qualified leads or sales accepted leads. But really what we're looking for there is how many folks are coming to us ready to talk, and is that trending in the right direction? So that's what I would call the North Star metric in any sales-led demand generation function. But leading indicators above that, looking at signals that are feeding into that North Star metric, in our case, was all account-based. So I really like using 6sense for this, but of course there's lots of other ways to get it done. You can build your own in HubSpot or whatever marketing automation platform you want. But essentially looking at, okay, here's our target account list or our ideal customer profile. How many of those accounts are we engaging anonymously? How many of those accounts are we engaging with a known contact? How many of them are in active opportunities? And building a funnel more that reflects accounts and not just individual people. What we saw from that at Jupiter One was that the leading indicators do take more time, but they did indeed follow the trend of ultimately increasing demo requests. And so that is the most direct lead into the sales pipeline. And so to me, that's a much better way to track KPIs versus starting with contacts and leads, which are really just, email addresses. So that's been the change that I'm seeing a lot of teams take. And it's not as simple as just abandoning the leads, the metrics that you would have followed in the past. You have to replace them with something. And I think lead to account based is one of the best ways to do that. So when we talk about attribution models or ROI tracking in demand gen, this is another topic of much debate and discussion amongst marketers. I think there's two different types of attribution. The first is for the purpose of who gets credit for pipeline. I think a lot of us feel that this is not the most productive, but when it comes to understanding pipeline, dividing up responsibilities, and measuring the effectiveness of, let's say, marketing versus sales versus your partner program, it's hard to get away from it completely. So that's the first purpose of attribution. The second purpose of attribution tracking is to simply understand what's working. But this becomes really difficult when you apply a one-size-fits-all attribution model to all of your campaigns. And so personally, I've moved away from that. So in the past, you might use first touch, last touch, or some sort of complicated multi-touch to assign, the credit to a specific campaign for a deal. But there's lots of flaws in that methodology. So what I do instead to demonstrate ROI or just the effectiveness of any given campaign is associate every single campaign with its own needle that it's supposed to move, essentially. So a top of funnel campaign is not necessarily intended to drive inbound demo requests. Sometimes the purpose is to get someone to visit your website for the first time so that they engage with your content, or so that you can cookie them and retarget them later. Middle of the funnel campaigns, perhaps you're just trying to get an anonymous visitor to go to a known contact by, registering for a webinar or otherwise, giving you their email address. And then of course you have down funnel campaigns where the ROI is very direct and obvious. So I think moving away from one size fits all for an entire program and into specifically evaluating the effectiveness of different campaigns is the only way to answer that question of what is working. Because if you zoom out too much, you will not get the answer that you're intending to get. On top of all of that, I really like layering that data with self-reported attribution. So including a required open text field of how did you hear about us is a really interesting data point. There will always be a certain number of folks that fill that out and give you a junk answer or don't respond. But a surprising percentage of them, at Jupiter One, it was something like 70% of the form fills did give us a real answer. And understanding what that person remembered as how they heard about you. Maybe, your CRM says you met them at an event 3 years ago, but what they remember is their colleague who referred them to you. Layering all of those factors together is really important because just relying on an attribution software or an ROI model that you think is really perfect is not going to reflect what truly impacts people and what they retain. So I think the answer to evaluating ROI is a little bit of everything. Anybody that tells you that ROI and measuring effectiveness is one size fits all, I think is going to miss some piece of that puzzle. So the path forward is to understand the purpose of the attribution and ROI question, right? Is it for credit? Is it for evaluating what's working? And then also layering a bunch of data points to kind of have a holistic picture. So I'm seeing two cohorts of marketers and their reactions to artificial intelligence. The first is those marketers that say, wow, this is going to make my existing job so much easier. I can use ChatGPT to write social media captions or even full blog posts. And they're getting very excited about doing what they're doing now faster or more efficiently. The second cohort is those marketers that say, wow, this fundamentally changes what I need to be doing. And I would consider myself to be in that second cohort. A really specific example is blogging and the way we approach search engine optimization. So I started my career as a copywriter. I used to churn out 15 to 20 blog posts a week working for a small agency. And that was the main strategy around content marketing and search engine optimization. It was about volume of content and ranking for every single keyword that could be remotely related to your product or offering. Fast forward to 2024, generative search experience is coming, topical authority is the name of the game, and just churning out huge volumes of content is not going to work. Long-form blog posts, maybe not the best strategy, but it doesn't mean that content marketing is going away. It just means that instead of writing blog posts that define basic terms, instead of that, you have to come up with original content that is going to feed the answers that folks ask of search engines and artificial intelligence. So I think that's a much more interesting but more difficult content problem to solve. But it's one example of how just doing the same thing we've been doing but faster is not going to last for long. So yes, artificial intelligence can make things easier. It's great to start with a brainstorm in ChatGPT or an outline, just so that you're not, having to deal with blank page syndrome. But it is not a cure-all. It certainly is not going to replace marketers anytime soon. Some of the best advice that I got early in my career was somewhat indirect advice, but I think it's important given all of the technological advances that we're seeing around AI and just the speed at which the tech industry moves. And that's that the job you'll have in 10 to 20 years might not exist yet. So don't presuppose what your path will be. I started out as a copywriter focused very specifically on search engine marketing and search engine optimization, writing loads of Google ads and dozens of blog posts a week. And, those are cross-applicable skills, but that specific type of job is going to change really rapidly given everything that's happening with generative AI. And it's just one small example. The job that I do now, demand generation, was not a career path, even when I started back in 2012. And so I think being open to where your career may take you, but also, focusing on fundamental skills is really important. There's always the debate between generalists and specialists, but I think even if you choose to specialize in something, keeping an open mind and developing general marketing skills is the best way to future-proof your career. Fundamental skills that I'm talking about are things as simple as good communication and effective writing, all the way through to, understanding the buyer's journey and understanding how buyers buy software, right? Because I think there's been a lot of focus in the last decade around tactics and channels. So a lot of discussion around how do I have the most effective LinkedIn campaigns? Or, should I target users using programmatic or direct ad buys? We get very bogged down into specifically doing one channel really well. And I think that there's a time and place for that. But the fundamentals of who would be interested in my product, whose problem am I solving, and where do they spend their time online, understanding buyers at that really fundamental basic level is cross-applicable no matter the channel, no matter the industry. And so I would just encourage anyone that's new in their marketing or demand gen career to focus on that over every single specific thing for every single specific channel, because it will continue to evolve. So my session at Demand 24 is going to focus on what it's like to transition from a lead generation strategy to a demand generation strategy. Everyone's talking about how the old school MQL waterfall doesn't work anymore, but you've got to replace it with something. And that something has to be data-driven and it has to move quickly. So addressing those challenges in a practical way can be tough. I'm going to talk about my experience doing that in just under 12 months at Jupiter One, which is a company in the cybersecurity industry. It's going to be a really fun session, so I hope to see you in Denver, April 10th and 11th for Demand 24.